We're buying you out. 15 cents on the dollar. Take it or we'll dilute you to nothing. Those were the exact words Jackson Pryor used. The same man who used to call me his partner and his closest friend, who had once shaken my hand in a rundown garage apartment while swearing we would build something world-changing side by side. Now he sat on the far end of a mahogany table in an office we had picked out together, our third co-founder Elliot Marsh beside him, both of them wearing the same rehearsed look of cold, deliberate cruelty. A charity case, Elliot added, tilting back in his chair with a practiced sneer. That's what you've always been, Blair. We carried you this far out of loyalty, but this company needs real leadership now, not dead weight with a sympathy stake. The folder pushed across the table held a buyout offer worth $600,000 for my 40% ownership of Helix Dynamics, the company I had helped create, built on the very technology one had invented. $600,000 for a stake they both understood was worth tens of millions. The room felt suffocating. Beyond the glass, San Francisco's skyline rolled toward the water, the same view we had celebrated under the night we signed this office's lease. That memory belonged to different people now, strangers wearing familiar faces, looking at me like a problem to be handled and thrown away. What neither of them grasped, what their arrogance and their attorneys and their swollen sense of self-importance had never allowed them to consider, was that the patent behind every cent of Helix Dynamics's value did not belong to the company. It belonged to me.
Solelai, legali, permanently mine.
And they were about to find out precisely what that meant. Before I get to the moment everything turned, you need the full picture of how we got there. This channel exists to tell true accounts of the instant trust breaks apart, when partnerships shatter, and when the truth becomes the sharpest weapon anyone in the room can hold. We just passed our first big milestone, and the climb toward 2,000 subscribers keeps going with every story told. If you want to be part of that growing audience, the subscribe button is right there waiting. My name is Blair Hoffman. By 31, I already understood that talent and opportunity rarely show up together. My mother raised the three of us alone on a respiratory therapist's paycheck after my father decided family wasn't something he wanted to stick around for. We never went without food, but we knew arithmetic the way people with comfortable lives never do, weighing a field trip fee against new shoes, deciding whether the thermostat stayed at 65 or crept to 68, calculating if the cheaper grocery store was worth the extra bus fare to reach it. My mother never once complained. She pulled her shifts, sat with us over homework, and gave every human being the same basic respect, whether they were a surgeon or the man who mopped the floors. She used to say everybody's carrying something heavy, and kindness doesn't cost you anything. That belief shaped how I walked through the world, not with resentment for what I lacked, but with an instinct for noticing what other people might be carrying. Empathy was never about pity for me. It was about recognition, really seeing people, understanding what drives them, reading a room before it reads you. That instinct ended up mattering more than I ever expected. I worked my way through UC Berkeley on scholarships, loans, and a revolving door of jobs that wrecked my sleep for years. I graduated with degrees in biomedical engineering and materials science, then took a research role at a medical device firm building next-generation prosthetics. The science thrilled me. The corporate machine around it did not. Every new idea crawled through 17 layers of sign-off. Every test needed justification written 3 separate times. The distance between what we were capable of and what we were permitted to attempt felt like working in restraints. By 27, I had started my own side work. Nights and weekends went into adaptive neural interface materials, substances that could react to the electrical signals nerves produce, potentially enabling prosthetics with real sensory return. Not just mechanical stand-ins for lost limbs, but devices that could actually feel, that could plug into the body's own nervous system. The potential was enormous. The science outpaced anything on the commercial market by years. And I was chasing all of it from a one-bedroom apartment, using equipment cobbled from salvaged parts and student-grade materials bought on a budget that would have made my coworkers laugh out loud. That's where Jackson tracked me down. Jackson Pryor had every credential I lacked: a Stanford MBA, a Rolodex of venture capitalists, family wealth that bought him both funding and access. He had been scouting the prosthetic space for promising technology to build a company around, when someone we both knew mentioned my work. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday night, dressed in expensive jeans and a button-down with that studied casualness rich people perfect, scanning my cramped setup with an expression I couldn't quite place. You're really doing neural interface research here? He asked, lifting one of my prototype sensors. This is graduate-level stuff. Why aren't you at a university lab? University labs move slow and publish everything, I answered. I'm not ready to publish. I'm ready to build something real. That answer hooked him. For the next 3 hours I walked him through everything: the conductive polymer composites I'd engineered, the algorithms that decoded nerve signals, the theory behind true sensory integration. Jackson listened with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time. Someone finally understood the scale of what this could grow into. This could be worth hundreds of millions, he said on his way out. But you can't develop it alone. You need infrastructure, funding, regulatory expertise. You need a company. I need to maintain control of my research, I countered. I've seen what happens when corporations swallow innovations and bury them in development hell. What if you were the corporation? He asked. Co-founder, significant equity stake, decision-making authority. I bring the business infrastructure and funding connections. You bring the technology that makes it all worth building. The offer was seductive. My research, finally free of both corporate red tape and my apartment's limits. Real money. Real timelines. Real impact on real people. We spent the following month hashing out terms. Jackson wanted his former Stanford roommate Elliot Marsh brought in too. A man with a background in medical device sales who understood the commercial side of healthcare. The three of us would divide ownership, Jackson and Elliot at 30% apiece, and me holding 40% as the technical founder. It felt equitable. I brought the core science. They brought the business muscle and the connections. Lawyers drew up the partnership contracts, the operating agreements, the equity structure, everything notarized and properly filed. What I did separately, on the advice of a law school friend who helped me pro bono, was file the core patents under my own name before the partnership ever existed on paper. The neural interface materials, the signal processing breakthroughs, the integration protocols, all of it protected under filings that listed Blair Hoffman as the sole inventor. Helix Dynamics would license the technology from me. An exclusive license, generous terms, structured to help the company grow. But a license, not a transfer of ownership. My friend put it plainly: your invention, your protection. The company can use it, build on it, profit from it. But if the partnership ever falls apart, you keep the core IP. At the time it felt like unnecessary caution. Jackson and Elliot were my partners, my team, people I was building something with. I filed the patents anyway. The first 2 years of Helix Dynamics unfolded exactly the way I'd hoped. We closed seed funding, then a Series A that brought in $12 million, built a real lab, brought on a small team of gifted engineers and researchers, and launched clinical trials for our first product, a prosthetic hand capable of genuine tactile sensation. The trial results were remarkable. Patients could feel texture, temperature, pressure. One woman who had lost her hand in a factory accident broke down crying the first time she touched her daughter's face in 6 years. A veteran could crack eggs without shattering them, feel the weight of his son's baseball glove, experience a handshake instead of just going through the motions of one. The press coverage snowballed, TED invitations, glowing write-ups in medical journals, interest from major prosthetics companies wanting to license our tech. Our valuation climbed from $12 million to $40 million, and estimates pushed toward $200 million as FDA approval got closer. Jackson and Elliot were fielding acquisition offers every month. On paper, my 40% was worth $80 million. I finally left my apartment for a modest house, paid off my student loans and my mother's mortgage, and slept on a normal schedule for the first time in years. The work itself stayed thrilling. Every breakthrough felt like science fiction stepping into reality. Every clinical win reminded me this mattered far more than any valuation number. But my relationship with Jackson and Elliot had already begun to shift. Small things at first. Conversations that stopped the moment I walked in. Strategy meetings I never heard about. Hiring calls made without asking me, even for technical hires. Jackson started introducing me to investors as our technical specialist instead of co-founder. Elliot began framing every decision as the business side versus the research side, boxing my input into narrow expertise instead of leadership. When I brought it up, Jackson brushed it off smoothly. You're overthinking it, Blair. Everyone knows you're essential to this company, but investors want to see business leadership, not lab coats. Just optics. It was plausible enough that I let it go and buried myself back in the research, the trials, the work that actually mattered. Meanwhile, they were making plans of their own. The warning signs became impossible to ignore once we closed our Series B. $40 million at $160 million pre-money valuation. My stake was suddenly worth $80 million on paper, and there's $60 million apiece. That's when the restructuring started. Jackson brought in a new CFO, a hard-edged woman named Kathleen Winters, who immediately began optimizing operational efficiency. New approval chains that routed everything through Jackson and Elliott. Rewritten signature authority that cut into my financial oversight. Reshuffled committees that quietly diluted my vote on key decisions. All of it dressed up as maturing from scrappy startup into a serious company. I pushed back on some of it, but the answer was always the same: standard governance, investor expectations, fiduciary duty. Pushed too hard and suddenly I was the one being defensive, territorial, unable to grow alongside the company. The real warning came from our head of engineering, a sharp woman named Cassidy Park who had been with us since the earliest days. She caught me after a team meeting, keeping her voice deliberately even. "Blair, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise you won't reveal I told you." My stomach dropped. "What's going on?" "Jackson and Elliott have been meeting with Whitmore Medical, not about partnership or licensing, about acquisition. And the terms they're discussing, they're structured to minimize your payout." Whitmore Medical was one of the big players who had been circling us for months. Deep pockets, established distribution, everything needed to scale our technology worldwide. How would they minimize my payout? I asked. "I own 40%. Cassidy hesitated. "The structure they're proposing treats the patents as company assets. You'd get your equity percentage of the company's sale, but the patent value would be calculated separately and allocated based on some formula Kathleen developed. From what I overheard, it would reduce your effective payout by 60 or 70%. "The patents aren't company assets," I said slowly. "They're licensed to the company. I own them individually." Her face shifted into confused relief. "Then you're protected." "But Blair? They don't think you know that." I've heard Jackson refer to managing Blair's expectations and addressing the technical founder problem. Whatever they're planning, it's not friendly. I spent the next week moving carefully. I confirmed with my attorney that the patent filings and the licensing agreements were rock solid. I combed through every company document I could reach, hunting for anything I'd missed. What I found was worse than anything I'd imagined. They had quietly built a dilution scheme, prepared to issue new shares under terms that would have knocked my stake from 40% down to roughly 15%. The authorization sat buried inside governance language I'd signed years earlier without fully understanding what it allowed. They'd also been shaping a narrative. On a cloud folder Jackson had accidentally shared with me, I found draft board materials painting me as brilliant in the lab but strategically limited, unable to scale with leadership demands, a liability in acquisition talks. The framing was never outright false, just selective emphasis and careful implication. Blair's great at research but doesn't understand commercial realities. Blair's attached to the technology in ways that might complicate strategic pivots. Blair's equity stake is disproportionate to current contributions. Death by 1,000 insinuations, building the case to push me out. The meeting got scheduled with barely 24 hours notice. An urgent strategic conversation, just the three founders. I already knew what was coming before I stepped through the door. Jackson and Elliott were waiting in the conference room, the buyout folder already sitting on the table like a prop in a scene they'd rehearsed. The offer was insulting, 15 cents on the dollar, dressed up as generosity. "The company's moving in new directions," Jackson said. "All practice sympathy. Your contributions have been valuable, but the leadership team needs different expertise now. This offer lets you exit with dignity and capital to pursue other interests." $600,000 for an $80 million stake, I said flatly. "You're calling that generous?" Elliott leaned in, dropping the sympathetic act entirely. "We're calling it realistic. That $80 million is paper value based on technology you developed on company time, with company resources as part of company operations. The actual value of your contribution, separate from the infrastructure Jackson and I built, is significantly lower." "A charity case," he added, the phrase clearly rehearsed for maximum sting. "That's what you've always been, Blair. We carried you this far out of loyalty, but this company needs real leadership now, not dead weight with a sympathy stake." The character assassination was almost admirable in its precision, rewriting our whole history, wiping out my contributions, shrinking 3 years of partnership down to an act of charity. Jackson slid the folder closer. Sign today and we can make this clean. Refuse and we move forward with dilution and restructuring. Either way, your role here is ending. The only question is whether you leave with something or nothing. The anger that rose in me wasn't hot. It was ice cold and perfectly clear. 3 years. I had spent 3 years trusting these men, building beside them, believing we shared a purpose and a mutual respect. And the whole time, they'd been plotting to rob me the moment it became convenient. I pulled out my phone, opened my files, and set it on the table between us. Before I respond to your offer, I said quietly, I want to make sure we're working from accurate information. You mentioned technology developed on company time with company resources. Let's clarify that. I pulled up the first patent. This is the core neural interface polymer composition. Patent filed 14 months before Helix Dynamics was incorporated.
Sole inventor, Blair Hoffman.
I pulled up the second. Signal processing algorithms for nerve impulse interpretation. Filed 11 months before incorporation.
Sole inventor, Blair Hoffman.
The third. Integration protocols for sensory feedback systems. Filed 8 months before incorporation.
Sole inventor, Blair Hoffman.
I looked up at them. Jackson had gone white. Elliot stared at the screen like it might strike him. Every core patent underlying Helix Dynamics technology, I continued, is filed in my individual name. The company holds an exclusive license to use this technology, license from me under terms we negotiated when the partnership formed, terms that include royalty provisions if I'm ever forced out, or if the company is sold without my consent. That's not Jackson started. It's documented, I cut in. Filed with the patent office, referenced in our original operating agreement that your lawyers drafted and you both signed. The company has exclusive use as long as I remain an equal partner with appropriate decision-making authority. Termination of that partnership status reverts licensing terms to standard commercial rates. Elliot finally found his voice. You can't hold the company hostage like this. Those patents should be company property. You developed them for company purposes. I developed them in my apartment with my equipment before this company existed, I corrected. Then I licensed them to our partnership under favorable terms. Terms you're now violating by attempting to force me out. Jackson was scanning his phone, no doubt checking with his lawyers in real time. His expression already confirmed what I knew. I was right, they were cornered, and the entire balance of power had just flipped. What do you want? He finally asked. I want my 40% stake respected. I want equal partnership authority restored. I want Kathleen Winters and her dilution schemes gone by end of week. And I want both of you to understand that if you ever attempt something like this again, I'll revoke the favorable licensing terms and charge Helix Dynamics market rate royalties retroactively from inception. The figure my attorney had run, roughly $60 million in retroactive royalties based on the company's valuation and standard medical patent licensing rates, would have wiped out Helix Dynamics entirely and destroyed everything we'd built. But it was completely legal and completely mine to demand. The following 3 weeks were brutal professionally and clarifying personally. Jackson and Elliot scrambled to contain the fallout. Kathleen resigned quietly. The dilution plan got shelved. Talks with Whitmore were put on indefinite hold. But the partnership itself was beyond repair. We kept up professional civility in meetings, but the trust had evaporated. Every decision turned into a negotiation. Every conversation carried an undertone of suspicion. Cassidy was vindicated and promoted to Chief Technology Officer, a title she should have held from day one, and she became my closest ally in what was now a quiet Cold War inside our own company. The board, once content to defer to Jackson's business instincts, suddenly remembered that the entire value of the company rested on patents I controlled. My opinion started carrying weight. My votes started maturing. The old story about technical talent versus business leadership dissolved the instant everyone understood who actually held the power. But running a company in a constant state of internal war wasn't sustainable. The creative energy that had powered Helix from the start began to erode. Trials continued, but new research slowed to a crawl. The excitement of building something together had been replaced by the fatigue of watching your back. I started weighing my options. The patents were mine, the science was proven, and I didn't need Jackson or Elliot to keep pushing this work forward. What I needed was a different kind of partner, people who valued collaboration over control, who understood that equity meant equity, who wouldn't confuse a temporary edge in power for permanent authority. I found that at Ashford Biomedical, a mid-sized device company with a strong reputation and leadership I respected. Their CEO, Raymond Chun, had approached me months earlier about a possible collaboration. Back then I'd turned him down, loyal to Helix and to a partnership I still believed in. Now I set up a very different conversation. Raymond met me at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, away from both our offices, neutral ground. I heard there's been some turbulence at Helix, he said carefully. Industry gossip being what it is. My partners attempted to force me out for a fraction of my equity value, I said. They didn't realize I own the core patents. We've reached a stalemate, but the partnership isn't salvageable. He took that in with a slow, thoughtful nod. Raymond, what are you looking for? Option 1, I leave Helix, revoke their favorable licensing terms, and license the patents to someone else. That bankrupts Helix and frees me to work with a company that values genuine partnership. Nuclear option, he observed. Effective but destructive, I agreed. It would hurt our employees who did nothing wrong, delay technology that could help thousands of patients, and waste years of development work. I don't want that if there's an alternative. Option 2. Someone acquires Helix under terms that force Jackson and Elliott out, compensate me appropriately for both equity and patent value, and provide a leadership structure where the technology can continue developing. Ashford acquires Helix. I stay on as CTO with significant equity in the combined company, and we scale this technology the way it deserves. Raymond went quiet for a long moment, clearly running the math in his head. Jackson and Elliott would fight that acquisition, he finally said. They control 60% of voting shares. They control 60% of shares in a company that has no value without my patents, I said. I can make it very clear that any acquisition I don't approve triggers licensing revocation. They can sell the company's desks and coffee machines, but the actual technology walks out with me. That's hardball. That's reality, I corrected. The patents are mine. I've been generous in letting Helix use them under favorable terms because I believed in the partnership. That belief was misplaced. And now I'm looking for actual partners who understand that mutual benefit means mutual respect. Raymond reached his hand across the table. Let me talk to my board. If we can structure this right, I think there's a deal that works for everyone who deserves to benefit. The acquisition talks stretched across 4 months and made painfully clear just how empty Jackson and Elliott's business leadership had always been. Ashford's offer came in at $180 million for Helix Dynamics, contingent on Blair Hoffman joining as CTO and transferring the patent licenses to the merged company under agreed terms. It was a clean structure. Shareholders would split their percentage of $120 million. The remaining $60 million would come to me directly, as a licensing transfer fee separate from my equity payout. My total compensation came to $48 million for equity plus $60 million for the patent transfer. $108 million in all. Jackson's payout landed at $36 million. Elliott's the same. They argued it was unfair, insisted equity should just be equity and the patent should belong to the company. The board had no sympathy left to give. Ashford's bid was the only serious offer still standing. Word of the internal conflict and the patent ownership structure had already spread, and no other buyer wanted to touch the complexity or risk me walking away with everything. The choice was simple. Accept Ashford's terms, or watch Helix Dynamics collapse under its own dysfunction, while I took the patents somewhere else. Jackson tried one last angle. After everything we built together, you're really going to burn it down over ego? The irony was so complete, so utterly without self-awareness, that I nearly laughed out loud. You tried to steal my life's work for $600,000, I said quietly. You called me a charity case in dead weight. You spent months planning to erase my contributions and force me out. Don't lecture me about ego or partnership. Sign the papers or don't. But I'm done pretending you deserve more consideration than you've ever shown me. They signed. The deal closed 6 weeks later. Helix Dynamics became a subsidiary of Ashford Biomedical, and I joined the leadership team with both the resources and the authority to keep pushing neural interface technology forward. Most of Helix's staff, Cassidy and the core engineering group included, came with me. Jackson and Elliott walked away with their $36 million apiece, and whatever remained of their reputations after trying to cheat their own technical co-founder. Industry gossip being what it is, the whole story got around fast, and the professional fallout followed them in ways no amount of money could undo. The story could stop here. Justice done, betrayal answered, equity restored. But the real lesson goes deeper than one partnership falling apart. Technical founders, especially the ones without a traditional business pedigree, run into this exact vulnerability again and again. Bring the breakthrough, get pushed to the margins the moment the company turns into a serious business. Told they don't understand commercial realities. Can't scale with leadership demands. Need to let the business side handle the real decisions. Sometimes that critique is fair. Technical brilliance doesn't automatically translate into management skill or strategic vision. But sometimes, often, it's simply a power grab. Rewrite the story to shrink someone's contribution. Reshuffle the authority to consolidate control. Wait for the moment to push out the very person who made the whole thing possible. The real protection isn't purely legal. Though solid patent filings and airtight licensing agreements matter enormously. The real protection is understanding where power actually sits and holding on to your leverage. I filed those patents separately not because I predicted Jackson and Elliott's betrayal, but because I understood one basic rule. Protect what's yours before you share it. Make sure your generosity is a choice, not a weakness. The licensing terms I gave Helix were genuinely favorable. Below market rate, exclusive access, built to help the company succeed. But they were structured so that betrayal carried a cost, so that trying to take what wasn't theirs would end up far more expensive than simply being a fair partner. When Jackson and Elliott tried to push me out, they assumed I had no leverage, technical talent with no control over the business, a minority stake with no voting power, contributions too far in the past to still matter. They were wrong on every point because I understood something they'd missed entirely. The patents weren't a historical footnote. They were ongoing value, foundational to every product, essential to everything still to come. And they were mine. 2 years after the acquisition, the work at Ashford had gone further than anything I dared hope for at Helix. We won FDA approval for our first-generation prosthetics, launched a second generation with expanded sensory range, and started clinical trials for neural interface applications well beyond prosthetics, potential treatments for paralysis, sensory disorders, chronic pain. The technology that began as apartment research was finally reaching the patients who had been waiting for exactly this kind of breakthrough. Every success story, people regaining function, independence, a real connection to their own bodies, confirmed why the fight had been worth it. Raymond turned out to be the partner Jackson had only ever pretended to be, collaborative, respectful, genuinely invested in advancing the science rather than just squeezing value from it. We disagreed on strategy sometimes, worked through hard decisions together, and built something that lasted because it rested on actual mutual benefit. My mother retired comfortably. I endowed a scholarship at UC Berkeley for first-generation college students studying biomedical engineering. The acquisition money brought security, but more than that, it bought freedom, the ability to focus on work that mattered without constantly watching my back for the next betrayal. Jackson and Elliott landed on their feet financially. $36 million softens most falls. But their professional reputations carry a permanent asterisk. The story of trying to cheat their co-founder trails them everywhere. Investors grew cautious. Prospective partners started asking pointed questions. Some mistakes cost more than money. Some betrayals echo far longer than any bank balance lasts. If there's a real lesson to take from all this, it isn't cynicism about partnership or paranoia about trust. It's understanding that protection and generosity aren't opposites. Filing those patents under my own name before Helix ever existed wasn't distrust, it was due diligence. Licensing them to the company on favorable terms was generosity. Keeping leverage in case that generosity was ever abused was simply wisdom. The people who will betray you rarely announce it in advance. They speak the language of partnership while quietly executing a power play. They borrow the vocabulary of collaboration while consolidating control behind the scenes. They'll make you doubt your own read of the situation, question your worth, accept your own diminishment as something professional. The only real defense is documentation, airtight agreements, and a clear-eyed understanding of where the actual power lies, not to use it cruelly, but to make sure fairness stays a two-way street. Jackson and Elliott called me a charity case, dead weight, a technical specialist who needed to step aside for real leadership. They believed their business savvy was the true foundation of the company, and that my contribution was just interchangeable technical labor. They learned otherwise the moment $60 million in royalty obligations materialized from patents they had assumed were theirs to command. The lesson cost them next to nothing compared to what it could have cost me: $600,000 for $80 million in equity, a permanent erasure of everything I'd built, wiped clean out of the story of technology one had created. They gambled on my ignorance or my powerlessness. They lost because I understood something basic: generosity needs protection. Collaboration needs leverage. And trust without verification is just vulnerability waiting for someone to exploit it. The conference room where Jackson tried to force me out no longer exists in that form. It was renovated when Ashford merged the offices. Different furniture, different purpose, different atmosphere entirely. The room where I was once called deadweight is now where our team plans clinical trials that will help thousands of patients. Physical spaces always outlive the moments that happened inside them. The mahogany table where betrayal was attempted now hosts collaboration meetings. The office where power plays were plotted has become a space for real innovation. But the memory stays sharp. The instant partnership revealed itself as performance. The moment people I trusted showed me their true priorities. The moment the company we'd built together turned into territory they tried to seize. The smile on my face when they demanded I take $600,000 and disappear wasn't triumph. It was recognition. The same recognition I felt as a kid, watching my mother treat everyone with equal respect no matter their position in life. Understanding that the way someone wields power tells you exactly who they are. Jackson and Elliot wielded theirs through attempted theft, through diminishment, through calculated cruelty. And when that power evaporated, when the patents they assumed were theirs turned out to belong to me, when the leverage they thought they held simply dissolved, when $60 million in royalty obligations appeared out of nowhere, they revealed exactly who they were. Some people lead through collaboration. Others manage through control. The difference becomes unmistakable the instant the power shifts. And the person they underestimated ends up holding every card that actually matters. The patents were always mine. The technology was always something I created. And the generous licensing terms were always a choice I made freely. When they tried to take instead of ask, to steal instead of partner, to erase instead of acknowledge, the choice in front of them became just as clear. They could pay market rate. They could face $60 million in royalty obligations. They could sell the company under terms that finally reflected real value, real contribution, real equity. Or they could walk away with nothing. They chose to survive. They accepted the acquisition, pocketed their $36 million each, and left behind the company they tried to steal. The technology keeps advancing. The patients keep benefiting. The work keeps maturing. And somewhere out there, Jackson and Elliot are telling their own version of this story. One where they're the victims and I'm the villain. Where their attempted theft comes out somehow justified or misunderstood. Let them tell whatever story helps them sleep at night. The patents are still in my name. The royalties were paid in full. The equity was honored. Reality doesn't negotiate with narrative, and $60 million is an expensive lesson in the gap between position and power, between assumption and truth, between what you think you control and what actually belongs to you. The road from a garage apartment to medical device innovation was never a straight line. The path from partnership to betrayal to justice was harder than any technical problem I ever solved. But both journeys taught the same core lesson. Protect what matters, document everything, and remember that the most important patents aren't only the legal ones. They're the protections built into every agreement, every structure, every relationship, long before trust gets tested and comes up short. This channel keeps sharing stories like this one as we climb toward 2,000 subscribers. Real accounts from the moments when professional relationships crack, and the fallout reshapes entire careers. The subscribe button is there if you want to stay for more of these stories from the corporate battlefield. Some partnerships end in mutual success. Others end in betrayal and forced reckoning. More often than not, the difference comes down to who understood power, who documented their protection, and who realized too late that the person they underestimated was holding every card that actually counted.